Romance isn't going away. There are too many romance authors out here who love doing what we do. And there will always be stories to tell. And as long as there are readers who want those stories, we're going to keep them coming.
So fucking cool.
That's so motherfucking cool. So listen to So Fucking Cool.
Welcome to So Booking Cool, it's Jewel B. Today's author dialogue is about the world of romance, with 5 lovely resident novelists sharing their point of view with us today are Brianna Joy Crump, Fallon DeMornay, Romi Moondi, Sheena Binkley, and Deborah Fletcher Mello. Stay tuned. I want you lovely ladies to please introduce yourselves.
So my name is Brianna Joy Crump. I'm the author of Cages and Crowns. It's a YA fantasy romance. It's about 10 supernaturally gifted girls who have to fight to the death. Who's going to get to marry a prince and become the next queen. I have 2 degrees in English, both in creative writing, and I've taught middle school and worked at a university, but now I write full time.
Hello. So I'm Romi Moondi. I'm the author of a romance travel series, the 24-hour series, Paris and Italy, which takes place on the Amalfi Coast. They were published in the last year and a half. Before that, I was self-published, so those are my first 2 traditionally published books. I'm in Toronto, Canada, and a bit about my background. I went to school for business and marketing, so I did that for many years. Then I sort of decided to pivot careers. I took a pause. I lived in Paris for 6 years and I wrote a book and did that whole thing. It was amazing. And then of course you come back and you're like, oh wait, I need to earn money. So when I pivoted careers, I wanted to sort of be in the writing world. So I got into copywriting, and so now I'm a full-time copywriter by day.
Hi, I'm Fallon DeMornay. I'm the author of Stiletto Sisterhood, which originally started on Wattpad and then was later picked up by their publishing imprint and came out April of 2022, which is crazy to think of how much time has gone on since then. It's a chick lit novel about 5 besties, sort of a modern take on Sex in the City, but instead of chasing men, they're chasing their dreams and supporting each other in that journey. But yes, also like falling in love along the way. It's sort of an homage to my own sisterhood, which was like really influential for me and inspiring me in pursuing the things that were truly important to me. And also hopefully helping to tell my daughter that, you don't have to be a mom before 25 and you don't have to be married before 30. You can pursue the things that you actually want to do that are important to you and find yourself first, and then allow love to come to you when you're ready for it. Outside of that, I work for a non-for-profit organization. I work within Indigenous communities, and as well as doing some work in the African continent, which is like really exciting and helps bring a lot of inspiration and integrity into my own writing.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sheena Binkley, and I am a contemporary romance author. I have several books, including starting out with I Love My Best Friend series, Love and Life Happiness, and The Love Chronicles. My current series, Forever Love, is currently out. I have 2 books in that series, and I am currently working on the 3rd book. And right now, I still have a 9 to 5. I am an office manager, but I do plan on starting to write full time.
Okay, and last but not least, Deborah.
Hi there. My name is Deborah Fletcher Mello. I have been published since 2003. I have some 60 plus titles under my belt. My first book, Take Me to Heart, was published by BET Books when they were the imprint for African American stories. They were purchased by Harlequin, and I have been with Harlequin ever since. Have written for a few other imprints as well. I am known for my family series, the Stallion family, the Boudreaux family, the Black family. I write about family because family has always been very important to me. And as my life journey has gone on, and family dynamics have changed, so has my writing. I have recently kind of shifted to romantic suspense, and am writing for Harlequin's Colston family series, and eventually see myself maybe writing a little mystery suspense at some point in time.
All right. Yes. Amazing. Amazing. Congratulations on all your success. Congratulations to, everyone here as well. Clearly the word resonant was being used for a reason. So with that being said, how did writing show up in your lives? And when did romance become a part of your writing? Why don't we start with you, Deborah?
Interestingly enough, I was not a romance reader, so I really didn't have a clue about romance writing. I started writing in junior high school or middle school. I used to write poetry in the margins of my science lab book because I hated science and math with such a passion. And one day, my science teacher pulled me aside and she said that if I continued to write, she would give me a passing grade in her class. And so I did, and she did. And what that did for me was validate that what I loved most, and that was stringing words together, had value. Somebody liked it, somebody wanted me to do it. And my writing went on from there. Um, Romance. I always like to say that I fell into romance. When I wrote my first book, it was going to be the next literary tome, that was going to shoot me up the literary ladder and, be that big payday. What happened was I discovered that with a really good editor and deleting out 80 pages, you have a romance novel. But what I quickly learned was that my writing romance didn't follow the traditional path of romance. I didn't know that the hero and the heroine needed to meet and fall in love and then fall out of love and then get back together. And, there was a science to it. And romance readers were very quick to tell me that they loved my book, but I needed to get my act together. And that's when I started reading romance to figure out what it was I wasn't doing right and what it was I was missing, and discovered that not only did I want to write romance, but I actually loved reading romance. So those were the end of my romance snob days. And that's
Okay.
essentially my story. I've been doing it ever since.
And Brianna, in a sense, you can relate to what Deborah mentioned about, teaching, like how her teacher, wanted her to continue writing. Tell us about that, and while still answering the question, because we do want to hear the origin story of how you all fell into the craft.
Yes, so my how I became an author story is quite similar in many ways. I think most authors become authors because they were first readers. And I grew up very quickly. My father had two heart attacks when I was 8 years old. He was 35, and I was 8. And whenever he got out of the hospital, he read me the Harry Potter series. And so he got out of the hospital, and I had never really loved books up until that point. I think I had been reading like the AR books that you did at school that you were like required to read. And he came home and he needed something or wanted something to do with me that was like a connecting factor. So he went out to the library and got fantasy books, and he literally sat me down in his lap and read those books start to finish with me. And did that and literally until they were finished being published. I was probably 14, 15 years old and sitting on the floor, and he read them to me still. And so I grew up with being 15 years old and my father having open heart surgery. And so while other people were going on road trips in college, I was worried about, could I go on that road trip Because to me, driving 8 hours away was the difference in getting to say goodbye to my dad. If, like, could I get back that quickly? Like I had to think, really make hard decisions. And so I was always looking for ways to like add magic to my life, whether that was through writing, through reading. And I had a good teacher in college. When I went off to college, I was a creative writing major because I had started to really pick up those pieces of magic when I was in high school and in middle school. Like you, I wrote a lot of stories in my science notebooks when I shouldn't have been in high school. And so I started to want to be a writer in high school, but it really got started in college when I started to be a creative writing major. And I just wrote and wrote and wrote in the back of my classrooms. And rather than my teachers say, stop, you need to pay attention to our courses, they just let me. I didn't have any teachers who really said, you should be listening to what I'm saying. I'm trying to teach you how to write and teach myself essentially. So when I was a freshman, I was being allowed to take sophomore courses because they saw me wanting to learn. And when it comes to romance, I think I just loved characters so much. I think it becomes the relationship aspect, and that transferred into romance.
I did first starting out, it was about 9 years old. It was actually for a school project, which actually turned into something that I enjoyed doing. At that time, I was also reading a lot of different children's books. So, of course, that kind of made me want to actually start writing. And I believe, like, as time went by, or as the years went by, I really started just writing a lot of short stories. So it was mainly about friendship, happiness, just having fun. So I really wasn't thinking about romance at the time. But of course, as the years went by, going through a lot of different experiences, I just started writing a little bit more. And I just started thinking about with romance, with some of the things that I have experienced. So I think that's kind of what made me want to go into the genre.
All right, Romy?
Yeah, so I actually have a teacher story as well, which it's very interesting hearing people's backgrounds or how schooling influenced that. I feel like it really just highlights how important teachers are in our lives. For me, it was in high school. It was actually something similar to what Deborah was talking about. It was my English teacher. There was one of the assignments we had to do was write an informal essay. So I chose to do a humorous one, just because I've always been like fairly extroverted, and so what my teacher said to me, it was sort of actually like negative reinforcement, and your situation was positive reinforcement. But what she said was, if you don't start writing for the high school newspaper, I'm going to give you detention. Like, she actually said that in a joking way. But because I never thought like, oh, I should apply to write for the high school newspaper, because it sort of seemed like, it was like a select few. I don't think any of the staff was like diverse either. And I have a South Asian background. So I thought, okay, let me try it out. And then what I wrote was a satirical teen advice column. Like, it was like a fake person writing in wanting advice, and then I was like the fake doctor, like giving the response. So again, it was humorous, and that stemmed from what was natural to me. And then so after university, I started writing a blog, which was also humorous. And when that actually turned into a romance type of energy was, one of my friends said to me, why don't you start like blogging about like your dating life kind of thing? And it was sort of the intersection culturally between, my family wanting me to get like an arranged marriage and like trying to date and that conflict. And so there was a lot of humor to be mined in that. So it was very like rom-com type of informal essay blog post. And then that actually ended up inspiring my first book, which was a romantic comedy. And then fast forward many years later, that's always what I've written, is sort of in the comedy space, romantic comedies. I would say maybe my last two books, there's a bit more like drama and serious to it as well, which I feel like we're also seeing more in kind of romantic comedies like on streaming services or like the rom-com renaissance. Like I find that it also has like a little more depth. And you know, I always write South Asian main characters for representation in the genre. Yeah, but it all started there in high school.
All right. And yes, come on, Fallon.
So I started writing when I was 11 because of a school project. Up until then, I was that kid that had like my whole life figured out, and I was convinced by the age of 10 that I was going to become an animator and work for Disney. And then we had this school project where we had to write a novella, and by the end of that, it's like the light bulb went on, and I thought, no, I don't want to draw the story. I want to create the story. I want to write the story. And then all of a sudden, these voices were like alive in my head, and I could not write fast enough. I kind of fell into this like every single day writing, writing, writing. And it started off with like short stories, and then it's like everyone just got progressively longer as I went. It was manic. I don't know how I kept up with it. Like some of you, I was in class but writing in the back of my notebooks. And I now that I think on it, I wonder if more teachers were aware. I thought they weren't catching me, but now I'm hearing all your stories and I'm thinking, oh, maybe they did know. They just let me get on with it because it's like Fallon knows what she's doing. She's getting her assignments done and she's tackling everything. But I do remember one day a drama teacher stopping me because I was trying to fit in writing anywhere I could. So my lunch breaks, you would always find me in the library on the computer, right, working on my books. And my drama teacher came in, he just kind of did a double take and then he walked back over to me. He's like, I just have to say, Fallon, I always hear students say, this is what I want to do with my life. This is what I want to be. But every day I see you here doing it, like living it. And that meant so much to me. But at the same time, I was surrounded by so many people that kept telling me writing's not a career. It's not a viable path. You can't pursue this. It's not going to take you anywhere. So I was writing for myself. I wasn't actively thinking about what's the next step, right? It was just something that I loved to do. And I felt like if I didn't do it, I was going to go crazy. But when I hit about 26, 27 is when I just had this real shift in my mind. And I thought, why do I care what everybody else has to say? If this is what I want to do, if this is the thing that's actually going to make me fulfilled and happy, let's go for it. Let's just do it. But up until then, I'd only been writing for myself and writing a very rough first draft and then putting it away and then writing another really rough first draft and putting it away. I realized I had a lot of work to do in terms of understanding the mechanics of storytelling and learning craft and character and plotting and the genre rules and all of that. So I decided to put myself into conferences and attend seminars and workshops and read a lot more in different genres that I wasn't already reading in to really like hone in on the craft and understanding what the next step looks like, how to get an agent, how to get published, all of that. As far as the mechanics of writing. For romance has always kind of been, when I think back on it, part of my storytelling journey. And I attribute that to being a Disney girly growing up and loving those kinds of stories. But also, I started stealing my mom's books when I think I was about 13. So Nora Roberts became my queen. I think I've read just about everything she ever wrote. So it was just a very natural progression for me to fall into that genre.
Fallon, with you mentioning why should you listen to someone who's trying to discourage you from pursuing writing, Deborah, as someone who's been doing this for a very long time, did you face any of that kind of feedback from people, unsolicited advice, and what's the best way to kind of tune that out? How did you handle that in your path?
I think with my first book, as an author, one of the first things you do is read the reviews. And I got a review which said that we hope she does not give up her day job. And it cut me to my core, because I went in thinking everyone's going to love my writing. and quickly discovered, no, everyone's not going to love your writing. What became important to me was that I love my writing. And it was about, as Fallon said, writing for myself. And with each book, I continue to do that. I write stories for myself. I try to write a better story than my last story. I challenged myself to step out of my comfort zone and maybe write characters that I wouldn't necessarily think to write. But it really is just about trusting what I know in my heart I'm supposed to be doing.
Absolutely. Would anyone like to add to that?
Yeah, I can add a bit about that. I definitely faced a lot of that. Coming from the culture I come from, I received a lot of that pushback from within my own family, which was very difficult at the time because, if you're not getting that support from your immediate support system, it's that much easier to give up and, let their opinions just influence you, right? And also, that was very isolating as well. So when I first wrote my first series, it was before a lot of the online communities that you could find. So I put up like a post for a local writers group in Toronto, and we would meet at this coffee shop every couple of weeks and we would share chapters. So for me, it was always about I had to find the support externally. And at times that was very difficult. And I can even admit that I was very envious of other people from other cultures where, or you see it on TV shows and their parents are like, oh my gosh, you're so talented and you should reach for the stars and achieve your dreams. And I never got that. It was just so negative. Like, why are you wasting your time? And so that was hard, but I will say I'll fast forward like many years later. Like I remember I caught my mom reading one of my 24 hours books and she actually came to one of my book signings. So, it took almost 20 years. But I'm very heartened by the progress that was made. And that's why representation is so important for me because I know there are other South Asian young women out there and they're the next generation and maybe their parents are discouraging them. And if I can just show like, like stick with it, it'll be worth it. It's hard. But if you really love it, it's worth it. And so, yeah, that's very important to me. And that's why I write South Asian characters. And, also I should shout out Wattpad as well, because I wrote some stories on there. And I mean, that's a reading and writing app, and there's an entire online community and you get the validating feedback, like chapter by chapter, like you post a chapter and people might read it like an hour later. And then that helps you stick with it and get to the end as well.
Love that. We're going to talk more about, what's considered traditional publishing and then Wattpad. But yes, something you said, Romy, as well as you, Sheena, you talked about experience. Does romance only need to be written by people who have experienced romance? Sheena, we'll start with you.
Really think that. I know for myself, I try to put in real life experiences, stuff that I went through, so that way it can be relatable to readers. And just being able to do that, and especially with some of the earlier books that I have written, I have gotten a lot of feedback from readers saying, "Oh, I went through this experience," or some of the stuff that you have written is relatable. So I think for me, because I said I can't really speak for anyone else, but I know for me, just being able to find like real life experiences into stories, I think it is kind of helpful.
I think experience can enhance, but it's not the only way to tap into, like, because romance, it's understanding relationships, right? And there's so many components that go into it, from friendships, from family, from just all those different kind of interpersonal dynamics that we experience outside of a romantic relationship that can all tether in. So there's ways to cultivate from other areas of your life. It doesn't necessarily have to be just from romantic exchanges in order to portray that.
And I will say, like, I was kind of going at this question because I think anyone who's ever like been on Wattpad for 5 minutes can tell you that like a 14-year-old who's like never experienced anything can like, they can write some romance. It may not be like accurate romance, but like they get better as they get older, but like they can write some romance. And I think a lot of it is they've read romance or they watched TV. So much of like what we pick up on in our younger years is like what we visually see. We're watching Love is Blind. Like we're seeing things on TV. We're watching Bridgerton. So like we're visually seeing what the world says is romance. And so I think that like kids are trying to write it. So I think that like, do you have to necessarily experience it? It probably is better if you have some experience, but like the 13-year-olds on Wattpad are attempting for sure.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, I also think a lot of what doesn't work out in your life can inspire your work too. And honestly, I think those experiences of writing what you know can add those layers. Because in a typical romance, like, you know, you really have to earn the happy ending, whatever that is. And the other 80% of that is problems being thrown at your characters. And so I would say you don't have to experience necessarily successful relationships, but all your life experiences, like I mean, look at Taylor Swift, you know, every time she breaks up with a guy, you know, like monetize your pain or whatever. But I feel like that can really add depth and layers to the characters, to the conflict, to the dialogue and the banter and all those other things that make a romance great.
So with all of that, how do you then balance romance with other genres?
The balance comes in knowing your characters. Um, you're building a relationship, and the suspense or the fantasy, or in my mind, is the background. It's the world you're building around these two people. The balance comes in just creating their story and watching their love develop and become what it is you want it to be at the end of the story. You know, sometimes we as authors get it right. Sometimes, you know, people will say we get it wrong. We may have a little too much romance, but if that's what we want for our characters, then it works for us. If you need that extra fantasy or that extra suspense and it works for your story, then it works. But I really think it is about how you build the relationship between your characters.
I will add that understanding the genres that you're looking to combine and the order in which you're looking to combine them is also critical too. Like a romantic fantasy is going to have very different parameters to a fantasy with romantic elements and very different set of reader expectations. So knowing that is also going to help inform how much you weave in, how much needs to be on the page, and the layers that are going to develop within the story.
There was a huge debate. I don't know if you guys are part of the Threads debate on like whether there's a happy ending with romantasy or
Which
not.
is why I said romantic like romance, you know, because it's
the
like if it's romance is the forefront, it's got to have the HEA. If it's fantasy with romantic elements, then you can,
the fantasy romance people versus the romantic people were like having a
but that's how you know
fight.
they never read romance, right?
No, they were having a big fight. I am a fantasy romance author, so we're not guaranteed a happy ending over here. Just letting you know. Sorry about it. I do like them though.
So Brianna, for you, when you're putting together the story, does it start for you with fantasy then, and then romance is secondary?
So for me, like Deborah, I'm a very I'm very character based always. So I think you definitely have to look at like the plot parts of your genre. So your happily ever after. If that's part of your genre, if you're a romantic author, you better have that happily ever after because people are gonna be mad if you don't. But I am very much looking at what my characters are going to be doing inside of that genre. And I kind of look at the genre as its own character as well. I think a lot of people look at their setting as a character sometimes, but I look at the genre sometimes as its own character and how I can work with it as a character within my main characters. How can I work with it? And so I think it really depends on the elements that you have. My book of Cages and Crowns is semi-historical. It's 1940s inspired. So you're adding elements of that in there too. So I think it really depends on like what your genres you're mixing. It can really get like dicey. It can really get like mixed up in there. So I think it depends on what you're doing. But when it comes to romance though, I'm very character driven always. I'm always like gonna go with whatever the characters are doing and lean back on the plot secondary usually.
How do you know if a romance story is better suited as one novel or a series? Sheena, let's start with you.
For me, it just depends on, I guess, if there is more story to tell, with just a trade along novel or a standalone or just a series. With me, I don't write a lot of standalones. It's mainly in series. So, because I always feel like the characters that I do have, there's more to tell. So I always try to break it into several parts. So with standalones, yes, you can do it all, have like the HEA and everything, but I think for like some stories, it probably needs to be more. So that's why I always feel like a series always kind of good to write.
Go on, Deborah.
When I started writing, for me, I saw all my stories as being standalones. Um, I started the Stallion family series, which was the story of four billionaire brothers out of Texas. I didn't foresee that being a series, although I knew that I would tell each brother's story. What happened was it became so popular that the publisher came back and said, well, you need to find more relatives because we need more stallions. And I had written myself into a box. They were four brothers. There were, no other family. And the challenge for me at that point was, how do I find family, dig them up out of the grave and make it realistic enough that my readers didn't look at me like I was crazy. So we found a father's illegitimate daughter and threw her in there. And then later on, we found some distant cousins who lived halfway around the world. And, we went on from there. I don't necessarily enjoy writing a series because typically once I've written the book, I'm done with the characters. There's so much crazy going on in my head that I'm already excited about moving on to whatever is next. The world building around the series I find is very different because you have to keep that continuity going, and I find it easier for me with suspense because I can take a big going on and give you little pieces of it in each individual book until the end when you find out who done it. So balancing that for me is very interesting. But I kind of prefer standalones.
And another topic in the world of romance is the intersection of romance and social issues, such as feminism, gender roles, and interracial pairings. Fallon, what can you say? I know that you like to write, women-led, boss women in charge and high-powered. So how do you navigate that as an intersection within romance?
One of the greatest things I think that's happened within the last 5 years has been like the push for like own voices and bringing in that really important conversation around diversity and veering away from problematic rep and trying to undo a lot of the damage that certain narratives have created for us as women or people of color and finally getting to challenge a lot of the stereotypes that have been put forward again and again and again, like, the white savior trope and, the angry Black woman trope and all that stuff. And to finally tell stories that are actually giving those of us the kinds of range that we haven't seen before. Like when I was younger, I didn't realize I was unconsciously doing this, but like if I was writing fantasy, I was very comfortable doing it in a non-Western setting and having non-Western characters and exploring so much diversity. But when I would switch over to contemporary, all of a sudden everything became very white coded. And I didn't realize I was doing that because on some unconscious level, everything that I was seeing in the media was telling me I didn't exist. I was never going to be the leading heroine in a situation because I wasn't blonde hair and blue eyed. And, I have all these different backgrounds inside of me that, I was never at the forefront in that way. And so it was like informing the way that I was writing. And then once we started having these conversations about diversity and representation, all of a sudden I sat back and I thought, oh my God, like there's so much to unpack here. And there's so much to challenge here. And when I wrote Stiletto Sisterhood, I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified because now it's like I took a diverse girl group and I put them in a contemporary space. And I felt like I was opening myself up to be challenged, to be criticized, to be judged, to be told that this isn't acceptable and all these things. But it was a necessary step to take to heal something inside of myself that I didn't even know I needed to heal and confront. And my daughter, when she was 12, she turned to me and she's like, Mom, I feel like I'm she, they. And I got really emotional because I was like, that language didn't exist when I was younger. We didn't know how to explain certain things or how to identify certain ways. And all of a sudden, that language exists and the space to have these conversations exists. And we're writing stories that are putting protagonists like her at the forefront where she can see that and say, I'm allowed to exist. I'm allowed to hold space. So I feel like that's the beauty of what's changed in the writing landscape, I think, for us in a big way. That's been great to be a part of and great to finally settle into and explore.
And what about interracial pairings, Romi?
Yeah, so I think what's important, at least for me, when I write the characters, that one isn't just in service to the other, because I feel like that can be problematic. Like one isn't rescuing someone from their family or whatever. But also like for the male character to bring something to the table. And that's a part of broader feminism as well. Some of the stories I would read in the past and, they'd have the character and she falls in love with someone after he says 3 words, but he's kind of a bad guy. He's not that supportive and he screws up, but she just is so obsessed with him and things. I'm just very, very uncomfortable with that, especially from an interracial perspective. If it happens to be interracial, it'll be situational. It'll be because like in the 24-hour series, it's a coworker. They both miss a flight. His personality, I knew off the bat, needed to be a brash, sort of arrogant salesman in the beginning. So it made sense for him to be white because historically, like in that environment, like that makes sense. But it wasn't because I want the South Asian woman to be with a white guy. So, you know, I think you have to be like very intentional about it. And then, yeah, definitely have the character bring something to the table. So like, as the story goes on, you learn a lot more about this guy. Like the way he was, it's a defense mechanism. And then you see that there's a lot more underneath. And you know, it's interesting because it only takes place over 24 hours, but I feel like a lot can happen in 24 hours. I myself have experienced that as well. And so you can see the progression of what the characters do for each other, and you know, just to keep it healthy in that sense that there's a reason why they're falling for each other and they both benefit each other in some way. And in terms of the feminism, I think like for South Asian characters, like a big thing for me was to show more stories where they're not being boxed in. You know, because at the time I was like, I've never seen a South Asian woman traveling around, having adventures. And this idea of like brown girl joy, I guess you could call it, was missing from the content I had seen. And so that was really important for me. So I like to, you know, mess up those characters a bit, have them make mistakes too, you know, maybe they'll hook up with someone, maybe they'll regret it. And just, I feel like the most important thing for me is for my South Asian characters to get to be able to have all the experiences that historically we've seen white women get to have. And so I try to lead with that in my stories.
I think for me, most writers, we interject a lot of ourselves into our stories. And we also interject what we have lived and seen in our families. And not all of our families are monolithic in that, you know, everybody in the family is white or everybody in the family is Black. You know, we have interracial couples in our families. And as writers, we sometimes write about those couples, whether we do it subconsciously or on purpose. Writers are also people watchers. You know, we're watching how people interact with one another. And we're taking all of that and putting it into our stories. One thing that I learned very early on in my career is that although my audience may have been adult women, there were teen girls who were reading my stories. And it was important for me to bring authenticity to that story so that as they moved through their lives and their relationships, if there was not a woman or a parental figure there to give them the advice that they might need, that they can think back, well, you know, I read this in a book once and, you know, it was good advice. I remember I got a lot of pushback from an editor because my heroine asked the hero about his finances. What are you bringing to the table? And she said that was too realistic. And now, you know, the heroine wouldn't do that. For me, yes, she should do that. And I need it to be in that book because if a 14-year-old who doesn't have anyone else to ask reads that, she might go into a relationship thinking, okay, I need to know what this guy is bringing to the table. So we take everything that we live on a daily basis and we throw into our stories. Whether we do it subconsciously or not, we do it. So when we're pairing, you know, African Americans with Asians or Indians with whites, we are bringing what we see on a daily basis. And we don't live in a colorless world. So my thoughts.
And I can like add a little bit to that because I write for teens. And I think a lot of you guys write for a more adult audience. But I'm a young adult author, so my audience is more like 13 to like 18, just in general. And so my second book, the cast widens and grows like more diverse a lot. But the first book is really like 12 characters. Just in general, it's very, very small cast. And there's only 2 men in that whole cast. The rest are all female. And so it is very much the female gaze. And I think that is probably like the coolest part of the whole book, is because girls just get to exist. And they get to I don't remember exactly who said it, but they get to just like have backstories and get to just like exist and exist for who they are, and not have to necessarily have a reason. They don't have to be the like the funny fat friend. They get to just like be a person who's like fighting to the death in an arena. And that causes a lot of conflict. And I think that's a cool part of the story, but there's a lot of diversity within that 10 group of girls. There's only 2 guys. So I think but you are writing for teens. So you do have to like, I don't know, cater to them and like what they would want to know and what the issues that they're dealing with and like their dating world, which is a little different. Their conflicts and like what they think about guys are slightly different.
So in terms of like readership and the interaction, we have traditional publishing authors here. We have Wattpad authors here. I want you to speak to your favorite way to interact with your readers.
On Wattpad, I had actually signed up for it. I was on mat leave with my son and I was bored out of my mind and I was craving community. And I remembered when I was a teen, I found like this writing forum. It was very rudimentary and not at all like what we're able of having today. But that was the closest I ever came to like having a writing community when I was younger. Up until then, it had been like a very closeted kind of hobby that I did just for myself. So when I was on mat leave, I thought, I want that sense of community again, but there's got to be something that exists, but even better today. So I did a Google search. Wattpad was the first thing that came up. And they were having this big contest with Cosmopolitan magazine at the time. And it was tethered to 50 Shades of Grey, which I'm not a fan of. But the top 5 people that won that contest were going to be featured in the magazine. And I thought, well, that might be like a great incentive to challenge myself to take something that I don't particularly like and see if I can create something that I could be proud of and then maybe get in a magazine. But unfortunately, the rules were a little ambiguous. I didn't really understand that it had to be written in second person for some reason, which is like you walk into a room and you see so-and-so. I wrote it in first. So I didn't get picked, but I had one reader who latched on to my entry and she hammered me, please write another scene. I need to know what happens next. And so I thought, screw it. I had fun with this one chapter. Let's write another chapter and give her what she wants. So I wrote another chapter. She devoured it within an hour. And then she's like, when's the next chapter coming? So I was like, okay. The next day I wrote another chapter, devoured it within an hour. I'm like, can you please give me a minute to catch my breath? But she pushed me all the way through. And within the span of 6 weeks, I finished a 75,000 word novel because of this one reader. And it was just the first time where I'd had a connection to somebody as I was writing. I've always been good at finishing. I've never had a problem with finishing, but there was something interesting about having this almost kind of like symbiotic relationship where in real time, I post this chapter in an hour, I get this immediate feedback, this immediate validation. And she would say something and then I'm like, oh, that's actually a great idea. I can incorporate that into the next installment and then just keep going and going. So it was a unique interaction-based experience that I'd never had before. And that's what makes Wattpad very unique. I call it like a digital playground. It's a great space to kind of dive in, try something new, and find community. And if you're the kind of person that benefits from validation and feedback in real time, giving you that little push to get to the next chapter, it's a great space for that.
Deborah and Sheena, what are your thoughts on that in terms of like connecting and interacting with readers? How has that been for you, and what do you think about it in terms of like a digital way?
Interestingly enough, for me, starting out, way back when, there were no outlets for interacting with readers. This was pre-social media kind of days, you know. So, you know, you might occasionally get an email, you know, if you could do a book signing, you know, that face-to-face was your interaction with your readers. The influx of social media platforms has allowed me as a traditionally published author to get myself out there more. And it's also interesting because by nature, I'm very much an introvert. So, you know, connecting to people on a screen was far easier for me in the very beginning. You know, now with Facebook and Twitter and, you know, whatever else is out there, you can connect with almost anybody who's reading your books and wants to know more about you and what you're doing. So I think as a hybrid author, because I've also self-published some things, that social media aspect has been that pathway for me to do more. And I've never been on Wattpad, so I never knew it existed, you know, for a very long time. So it's interesting.
So I do agree with Deborah. Social media is pretty much any writer's friend now. So you're able to have a connection with your readers. Also with my reading group, I think that is, for me, that's essential because I'm able to talk to my readers, especially my like diehard readers. If there's like a certain book that I'm thinking about writing, like, oh, maybe I should ask the readers, like, would you want to see this book being released, or what's the next book I should write from my series? So I think being able to actually talk to the readers, getting their opinion, I feel like that's a huge connection in itself. And I feel like that is something that have made me choose certain books that I have put out as well.
Is it up to you as romance storytellers to portray healthy relationships? And if it's not healthy, is it to show why it isn't? Is that a responsibility that you all have as romance writers?
I would say yes. I would say definitely yes. Because I think as many women, I have gone through life in relationships that were not healthy, and didn't know it until it was too late. Um, I think it's important as a writer for us to express what it means to be in a healthy relationship, what it means from a female perspective to understand that love isn't supposed to hurt. It isn't supposed to be brutal or painful, or you aren't supposed to lose yourself within the relationship. Um, so I think we do owe our readers a responsibility to some degree, to give them that element of honesty and truthfulness.
Yeah, just to echo that, you know, growing up reading romance, the types of stories that I was reading, I think I started reading my mom's romance novels when I was about 13. And they always had very strong women, and very respectfully portrayed men. It taught me a lot about what to look for in a quality relationship, how to set boundaries, how I should be treated as a partner, how to be in an equitable relationship. Like it really laid a foundation for me. Not to say that I haven't fallen victim to the occasional trash bag. I think we've all been there. but it gave me the tools to recognize, I think, a lot sooner had I not developed that foundation, and to give me the backbone to be able to remove myself from it and to not be afraid to remove myself from it. Yes, it's a story. Yes, it's fiction, but it really does play a part in shaping mindsets. And, you know, you can be writing for adults, but it doesn't mean a teen is not picking it up too. And I do think that there is some kind of responsibility. And as you touched on, if it is an unhealthy relationship, I really think that needs to be navigated and showcasing why it's not healthy and how to mitigate that as well. But as authors, I firmly believe we do have a responsibility in that area.
What everyone said, first of all, and I guess I'll just add, like, I do think it's like our own responsibility. It's not something that's mandated, of course, like it's not part of the rules of engagement. Maybe the audience isn't demanding it in the same way they're demanding it happily ever after or whatever in romance, but just because they're not asking for it, that doesn't mean I wouldn't want to provide that. Because maybe they don't know they need it. Maybe it opens up their eyes to something they didn't realize. And it's never has to be done in a preachy way. And I don't think any of us do that. But done in an authentic way, you know, and it can also be healing for people without them even realizing it. Like they might think, oh, I'm just here for the rom-com ride. And then by the end, they might realize something about their own lives, and maybe that helps them in some way, and then it didn't even realize. And for me, if like art can also do that, I think that's really special.
You're talking about teaching, learning things. Past Brianna teaches, future Brianna things all the time. I've written like 12 books at this point, not all that have been published, but I will go back and read my old drafts. And so sometimes your past relationships just wheedle their way into your drafts, and you're like, man, I was going through something. And you, whether it's good or bad, sometimes you teach yourself things. I think it is our responsibility, especially if you are writing for younger people, or if younger people will pick this up, to navigate that in a respectful way, but also in a way that's gonna like translate well, and in a way that is gonna make sense to them, and make sense in a way that is gonna, I don't know, just come across well. Especially if you have characters that are like gonna need to break up with an ex, or I don't know, there's just situations that you do need to handle with care. Because if you come across, there's lots of books that you have come across, and then it's not always, situations are not always handled well, and you gotta handle them well.
Where do you all see romance going, and where do you want to see it go?
I'd like to see romance getting just more respect from the mainstream. Like, you know, it slowly has started to veer away from this, you know, bodice ripper stigma. But it still has a way to go, I feel like, in terms of people just taking it seriously outside of those of us who love the genre. So I would love to see it reach a point where it is given the same coup de grace as, like, you know, Stephen King writing horror, you know, and appreciated that just because it ends fluffy and happy doesn't make it any less of a quality story that requires just as much work and research and understanding and nuance and all these components that go into suspense, and, you know, the stereotypical male dominated areas that are touted as being, you know, literary gods. I would like to see that mindset shift.
I also feel like progress has been made with representation, but I feel like in the literary world, we are sort of miles behind like the streaming content world of films and TV shows. Like, you know, you'll see like Issa Rae as producing her own shows, has her own production company. You know, One Day, which I just saw that David Nichols book, they cast an Indian character, even though it's not an Indian character in the book, and people loved it. It was like the #1 show on Netflix a few weeks ago. And so you know that people crave that diversity because it hits #1, right, on those platforms. And yet to this day, the New York Times bestseller list is almost entirely white. And so you have to ask yourselves, like, why is that? The audience wants it. So something in the system is broken where they're not getting it. And wherever that problem is, if it's not big enough book deals, if it's only niche book deals that go to people of color to check off a diversity box, whereas the big deals are still going to white authors, is it the marketing budgets that are not robust enough? Because the excuses you continually hear are, well, we published your book and it didn't go viral on TikTok, so I guess that means people didn't want it. But even TikTok was historically, like, it was called out that their algorithm was racist. Where influencers that were getting the most viral were usually white, as were the books they were talking about. So there's still so many problems in the literary world, like miles to go, but it's not going to make me give up. I'm just going to keep trying even harder. But I'm glad that some progress has been made. So I will say that.
I'll actually add quickly to your point, Romy. I would like to see diverse romance no longer relegated to just a single shelf, but the entire bookstore. Like, why do we have a lone shelf? Yeah.
Well, maybe somebody needs to do it, like a romance, solely a romance bookstore. Yes, why not? Any final thoughts about the world of romance?
Romance isn't going away. There are too many romance authors out here who love doing what we do. And there will always be stories to tell. And as long as there are readers who want those stories, we're going to keep them coming. The beauty of romance is that it's changing, and it's changing with the times. And as we all continue to push for diversity and push for those changes, we'll see them at some point. We'll see them at some point. There are young girls coming up after us who will pick up the mantle and continue to tell stories about love. It's a beautiful thing.
We're walking so they can run.
Mhm.
Truly, like I don't know. I was thinking the other day about how I remember like hearing people talk, like whisper about my grandmother. She'd have stacks of like Harlequin books, and people would be like, "Those raunchy like romance books your grandma reads." And now like we're all so bold about like how many chili peppers are in like the books we're reading, and like that is just like so. I don't know. I'm just like so proud of women. I'm just proud of like I'm proud of us. Like, you go, grandma. Like, read your books.
Wow. Okay, author dialogue, the world of romance has been spectacular. Loved having you ladies on, and thank you for what you do and what you have been doing. Being able to write for so many different people, you're showing all kinds of representation from race and ethnicity to age, and just the different intersections. Thank you for your time. And everyone, we just want to know, if there's anything that we should be on the lookout for. And yeah, how do we stay connected with you all?
Well, I'm all over social media now. Deborah Fletcher Mello, or Deb Mello Writes. I've got a new book coming out in June. It is the next in the Colton series, Colton's Blizzard Hideout. And I'm very excited about that. So yeah, just Google me.
I'm pretty active on social media too, primarily Instagram. I'm learning TikTok because I do have 2 books that are coming out this year. So I'm trying to ramp up a little bit of a buzz. I have a YA fantasy coming out in May that I'm self-publishing, and I have a space opera that is coming out traditionally in the fall sometimes. So it's going to be a busy year.
I'm most active on Instagram, so at Romi Moondi. Actually, we were talking about connecting with readers. I've connected with so many readers on there, and even locally, I've met people in person at events in Toronto who were like, "Oh, I saw your post on Instagram," so that's really cool. My most recent book, 24 Hours in Italy, it came out late summer, so it didn't really get like the full summer cycle. So I'll definitely be promoting it for this year's travel season. Also, for anyone in like kind of in the Toronto area, I was given the opportunity to host a romance writing workshop at the library. So more info is coming on that soon, but that's May 28th. But if you're on Instagram, you'll be able to find out more because it will be in person and also virtual. So people can join. Yeah.
I'm on Instagram as Brianna Joy C and on TikTok as my full name, Brianna Joy Crump. And I have two books. The paperback of Pages and Crowns, it will not look like this. It has a new cover. And then the second book, they're both out on June 18th of this year, traditionally, so you can get them in any bookstore and on the Amazon if you would like.
And last but not
Hey, well, I am on social media, of course, mainly on Facebook, TikTok as well. I do have a website, SheenaBinkley.com, and I am getting ready to start writing on my third book in the Forever Love series, which is coming out in June.
Yes, you guys are killing it. Congratulations to you all. Still at it. That's right. And more to come. And thank you so much to all the viewers and listeners. Until next time, so booking cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.